Chapter 1. The Anniversary. The sun blazes in an open sky, a hot, bleak star in a sea of serene, uninterrupted blue. It glints wickedly down the length of my blade, a searing reflection that is mirrored not 2 paces before me. Cade's blade meets mine with a crashing surety. I feel the reverberation of it all the way up my arm. Without fuss, he presses me back several paces into the cool shadow of the inn. All the while he holds my gaze, steady and unflinching and utterly unhurried as he forces my retreat. A bead of sweat drips down my brow and into my eye. I flinch. The length of metal I wield makes me feel clumsy and unbalanced. The leather grip slips uncomfortably in my grasp, my hands sandwiched end to end to fit together on the hilt.
Your form needs work,
Cade says. Your face needs work, I spit back. It's a lie. He's stupidly pretty, and even more stupidly tall. He's got a gravity to him, a strange sharpness to his face that lends itself to brooding. I should know. He does more than enough of it. Cateran's blade sits firmly in his right hand, and he moves with all of the surety of one born to wield. His sword slides down the edge of mine, resulting in a teeth-grindingly awful sound, and he thrusts forward, the barest hint of a grin tugging at one corner of his thin-lipped mouth. I jerk my body out of the way just in time. My sword is too long, too unwieldy, and I'm too unused to its measure. It throws off my balance, bringing me to a knee, but I am not so slow as to be brought low by this. I turn the stumble into a roll, crushing the young grass beneath me. My nostrils flare as that sharp, sweet, vegetal scent hits me. Crisp grass and fresh earth and the promise of spring in the air. I scrunch my nose up and valiantly fend off a sneeze. Back on my feet, I turn and only just catch Cade's small bark of laughter. A quiet, caged thing that falls off into silence almost immediately. He carves a striking figure, the golden sun glinting bright in those dark, earthy eyes, the distant blue mountain range framing him before me. He stands back. His stance is relaxed, daring me to approach. With a snarl, I rush forward. I grip the hilt with both hands. My palms are sweaty against the smooth leather. My blade arcs down with all of the force my tiny human body can muster. I watch, in those moments stretched long and thin, as my sword carves through the air like butter, congealed, chilled butter that doesn't ultimately halt the edge's movement, but does provide just enough impediment to make the arc feel slow and awkward. Cateran meets it readily. The bitter clash of metal does nothing to dissolve his composure. I attempt to yank my blade back, but he stalls me, and with a quick twist of his wrist, the sword is wrested from my grasp. He does it so very easily. It feels like we're performing a rehearsed choreography. My blade drops with a dull thud onto the dewy grass, the hilt coming down hard on my slippered foot. Ah, fuck! I curse. Cade grins down at me, one of his long, sharp brows arched expectantly. Those scant few millimeters of movement contain a truly unbearable amount of self-assurance. I find it deeply irks me. The edge of his blade moves to my throat, no more than a fly's leg from my skin.
Well,
he says, his voice low and expectant.
Do you cede?
When I swallow, I can feel the metal's kiss. Before he can press any further, I toe out of my slippers and stretch forward. My head lengthens and grows large with teeth and flame. Claws emerge, steely and sharp from my hands. My human skin shifts to gleaming golden scales. Cade's eyes get all big and buggy. His sword goes wide, drawing sparks as it grazes my scales before I promptly shove him away. His pathetic human strength is no match for that of my true form. With a choked gasp, he topples backwards into the dewy grass. He struggles against me, but it's like holding a kitten by the scruff of its neck. It can wiggle and swipe with its claws all it likes, but its efforts are, at best, mildly annoying. Caterin may kick and scream, not that he's likely to do either of those things, but at this point, he's more of a threat to himself than to me. I sit back, smugly, with one clawed talon splayed across his chest. I lower my head towards his and snout a plume of smoke directly in his face. Ugh. Coughing, Cade's hands find the curve of my sternum, and he pushes futilely against me, trying to gain any ground he can. I bear it with what I know to be a look of utterly infuriating smugness. It's an expression I've spent years perfecting. Once, Cade told me, begrudgingly, that he hadn't known dragons could look quite that smug. I always take immense satisfaction in proving him wrong. After a minute of struggling, he finally collapses back into the grass, his whole body going limp as a soggy noodle as he looks up me with a sort of exhausted resignation. Tiredly, he raises a hand to pat the side of my snout.
All right. I yield,
He says, exasperated. Satisfied, I close my eyes and let my body knit back in on itself. It's somewhat like banking a fire, only the fire is me. When I next open my eyes, I am atop him still. I'm seated just beneath his sternum, one hand planted on each of his shoulders, my awkward human legs splayed on either side of his body. My bare knees dig into the wet grass. The remnants of my torn clothing lay scattered around us. Pity. I really liked that tunic. A cool breeze stirs, raising goosebumps on my naked human skin. I feel his breathing hitch, feel the stutter of his chest, and the deep, heated embarrassment in his heart. His face has gone all red and puckered and stupid. I cock my head to one side as I gaze down at him, a lazy smile pulling at my lips. Cade sits up abruptly. My seating disturbed, I topple backwards and only barely manage to thrust a hand out in time to catch myself. Hand smarting as it digs into the dirt and grass, I scowl back at Cade. He gives me a pointed look, heaves a sigh, and then stands and gestures to the sidelines.
Someone. Sir Sieglein, lend Fionn your cloak, please, while someone finds him something to wear.
I'll never get sick of the way he sounds out my name. Like any human, he can only fit his mouth around the basest iteration of my name, but he does it better than most. Dusting the dirt off my hands, I hop to my feet. My right foot still smarts a little, and I have to favor it when I stand. Sieglein unpins her thick cloak from where it attaches to her traditional red brigadine. She leans down and drapes the garment around my shoulders. The largest of Prince Caterin's guard, Sieglein, is a towering figure. She is brawny and thick about the waist and wears a massive greatsword strapped to her back. Despite this, she never quite manages to look intimidating, what with her open face all haloed by a frizz of dirty blonde baby hairs that have sprung free from her ponytail. Sieglein drops a meaty hand to my shoulder and gives me a big smile from her perpetually sunburnt face. Her fingers are thick with calluses. I guess I should congratulate you on your win against the prince, Your Grace, Sieglein says to me, laughter on her breath. I grin and shoot a meaningful glance past her, where Cade is now stripping off his padded practice armor.
Fionn didn't win,
Cade replies tersely.
he cheated.
Did not, I gloat. I carelessly knock Sieglein's hand off my shoulder. I wrap her cloak round my waist and then throw the remaining cloth over one shoulder like a toga. She eyes me apprehensively, probably not much liking the sight of her best cloak wrapped around my naked body. I ignore her.
You brought a dragon to a sword fight,
Cade says. I watch as Elske, the captain of Cade's personal guard, helps him stretch out a tight muscle in his shoulder. She's a flinty silver fox of a woman, hot in a I will break your wrist if you so much as breathe in my direction sort of way. Cloak now pinned in place, I amble over and clasp both hands above my head and stretch, pressing my palms up towards the sky. Cade is very resolutely not looking back at me, his sharp face turned towards our lodging. It's not exactly up to our normal standards, but it's the best Sindwick has to offer, and Cade isn't the type to complain. He is as gracious a guest as he is a host. Well, Cade, to be fair, I begin, injecting a coquettish lilt in my tone. I lay a hand on his upper arm, just beneath the shoulder. His eyes flit to that point of contact before he finally looks back down at me. I wait until I'm certain I have his full attention before I conclude my gloating. The dragon I brought was me. And you didn't say anything about dragons not being allowed.
I thought the notion was implicit when you challenged me to a sparring match. But I can see that I was mistaken,
he says dryly. He holds my gaze for several heartbeats. And then, as if he can't help it, a small smile creeps onto his lips.
I should have known better.
I don't think anyone else catches the way his voice softens slightly. Cade reaches forward and ruffles my hair briefly before turning away.
Regardless, I think it's best we ready ourselves now, else we'll risk tardiness.
I grin unabashedly at his back and fall in behind him as we enter the inn. It's an ancient, outdated building, fit with heavy furnishings and muted earth tones. Just looking at it makes me feel tired. Everything in here is old and abused, from the rich velvet seating that's wearing thin to the hefty oak table that can't hide its many gouges no matter how many layers of varnish are applied. To the staff's credit, there has been an effort to fix it up for our stay. But if anything, the blatantly fresh coat of red paint all over the walls only makes everything else seem even more run down by comparison. Still, it's not as if we had much choice in lodging. It's the only building central to Sindwick that has the space to house the entirety of the king's retinue. One of the inn's people, a girl maybe 3 or 4 years my junior, approaches Cade and gives him a clumsy curtsy, a bundle of large towels held tight in her arms. Good morning, Your Highness. There's a bath drawn for you in your room, if you'd like. The poor girl's eyes flit to me and my near-nakedness for a scant moment before she reddens all the way to her hairline. Thereafter, she very resolutely keeps her gaze lowered.
Thank you, miss,
Cade replies. I eye the girl speculatively. She's charming, in a common way, all rough edges and country manners. She seems very out of her depth. Will you be requiring attending, Your Highness? She stammers, red-faced.
No, thank you.
When we reach the adjoining rooms where Cade and I are sleeping, she fumbles with the door and the towels go spilling out of her arms. Cade catches them neatly and takes them up an arm, despite her protests. She stands just outside the doorway, visibly grasping for words. With one last grin in her direction, I gleefully close the door in her face. Cade eyes me as he sets down the towels on a scuffed-up dresser. Not even the vigorous polishing the dresser recently received can disguise the many years of wear it has endured.
That was rather ill-mannered of you, Phaon.
Cade chides. He stands next to the steaming tub in the center of the room. Cade unclasps the cummerbund from his waist and lets it fall to the floor before moving on to the buttons of his tunic. She was annoying me, I grouse, reclining on the brown velvet chaise lounge. It's not very comfortable, the padding having long since gone flat. Our adjoining rooms, much like the rest of the inn, are decked out in polished dark wood and furs, and all of it rendered in deep browns and charcoals. It looks very much like some sort of depressing, overgrown hunting lodge.
Everyone annoys you.
Cade pulls his undershirt over his head and starts unlacing his boots. I eye his bare skin covetously. The expanse of lean muscle is touched by a smattering of scars, some small and nearly invisible, and others larger and darker. Whispers of a violent history. Only I know all of his scars, and only I can tell that Cade is not displeased with me. I can feel his quiet amusement through our bond, a light note plucked on the tether between us. I close my eyes for a moment and luxuriate in the sweet simplicity of his good mood. When I open my eyes, Cade is fully naked and sliding down into the bath with a contented sigh. He is a beautiful man, tall and dark-eyed and somber. He has the sort of face that inspires people to read poetry, if for no other reason than to impress him. It's mildly infuriating. "Will you be requiring attending?" I ask with mock obeisance. I look at him from under my golden lashes. "Your Grace?" Cade pulls a face at me, his skin pinked from the hot water. He aims a splash in my direction, but it falls short.
Oh, ha ha. Very funny, Faye.
I roll onto my back and grin at him. Lazily, I raise my hand into the air and brandish the bottle of soap I nicked from beside the bath earlier. Cade glowers at me from where he sits, chin deep in the water, his knees pressed into his chest.
You're a damned magpie, you know that?
He mutters. I rise from the lounge and approach the burnished copper clawfoot tub, bottle of soap in hand. What else am I ask. I stand beside him and place the soap bottle on a little table next to the tub.
A larcenist?
He replies.
A no-good filcher?
I lean forward and dip my cupped hands into the hot water. I dribble the water over the top of his head so that it cascades down his neck and shoulders. Cade sighs and closes his eyes. Water kisses the sides of his face and the short beard he's recently cultivated. All is silent for several moments, save for the sound of falling water as I gently and thoroughly wet him from the shoulders up. Eventually, Cade submerges himself in the bathwater. When he resurfaces, he says,
Thank you.
His voice is small, and it hitches slightly, like fabric caught on a splinter. I pump a generous amount of soap into my hands, rub them together to form a lather, and sink them into the hair at his scalp. The soap's spicy perfume fills the space between us. For what? I ask. I carefully coat the length of his hair. It's grown out recently, the gentle waves falling just below his chin. I wonder absently if he's trying to emulate his father. If so, he's nearly halfway there.
You knew that I was feeling tense.
His arms tighten around his knees, the muscles in his shoulders pulling taut.
that I needed to let off some steam. Do something instead of just sitting around, waiting for the ceremony.
My fingers quest forward until they meet his hairline. I massage the soap into his scalp. There is a weight in the air between us. A space where things unspoken lay just barely concealed. I wonder if he feels the way the tenderness of the moment has stretched languishly, lulled by the heat of the bath and the scent of his soap.
You're uncharacteristically contemplative today,
He says. I can hear the smile in his voice. My fingers curl in his hair. Sorry, I wasn't paying attention. I lie. My grip tightens as I pull, dunking him backwards into the hot water. He comes up, red-faced and spluttering. By the time he's halfway out of the tub, slipping slightly in his haste, I'm already into the next room, my hand on the door.
Theon!
He exclaims, suds dripping down the sides of his shocked, pretty face. Don't forget to rinse, I call, and promptly shut the door between us.